Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Last Dance podcast, the review of episode 3 and episode 4 of ESPN's The Last Dance. Again, I'm John Vicari alongside Tyler Hartman and Tom Leuthner. We recapped 1 and 2, which you could see previously, but tonight we're live right after episode 3 and 4. And guys, another 2 great episodes. This documentary just keeps delivering. And we'll start with Tyler first because you mentioned this in our text message group chat before or during the documentary, I should say. Your biggest takeaway from episodes 3 and 4, Tyler?
Yeah, biggest takeaways from episode 3, Dennis Rodman. I don't know. I appreciate him much more now. He's awesome. He's one of my favorite players of all time. He's just, I don't know. So like something about him, he's just awesome.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway was actually the bond and chemistry that Jordan had with Rodman, because I thought after the whole Bad Boys of Detroit Pistons situation, I thought they figured that they hated each other when they were on the Bulls together. And I guess going into this, I thought the same thing, and knowing that they had a connection, a bond when they played together sort of surprised me.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it was sort of cool to see more so in episode 4, Jordan going back and forth with Dennis Rodman while he was on the Pistons, and then them working together as teammates. And we'll start with Dennis Rodman because in episode 3, they went back to his childhood. And I think really the shortest synopsis of his childhood comparatively to what they did with Scottie Pippen and, of course, Michael Jordan, who's the vocal point of this documentary. And it was pretty much, hey, no father figure in Rodman's life. His mom said, hey, you're 18, you're going to be on the streets. And he picked up basketball not because of a passion for it like Scottie and like Michael, but just because it's better than doing drugs.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. I mean, compared to a lot of players you can even see now, like a player like Delonte West, threw his life away because of drugs. And the fact that, he held himself back from doing drugs with a basketball really blew my mind. And I guess, yeah, you're right. They didn't show much of his background, but they showed how hard it was for him, just in the brief little background check they gave him. And I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Like he said when he was younger, he didn't like drink or do drugs. He didn't like mess around with that type of stuff. And then, once he started like expressing himself in the NBA, he became like the biggest party animal in the league. Luckily, he didn't get into that beforehand, but I thought that was like interesting.
Well, and that was too because I forget who said it, but someone said when he came into the league that he was very naive, a naive person, wouldn't do the drugs that other people were doing. And obviously, as we got into episode 4, his life took a bit of a spin, and that's when it was really interesting. He tells Michael Jordan, he tells Phil Jackson, and this in when he is a Chicago Bull, so obviously the timelines change. But in the 1990 season, I believe, or 1998, when he needed just a vacation, and he said, we'll give him 48 hours is what Phil Jackson pretty much did. And maybe he did a little more so than 48, but the doc didn't mention that he, didn't show up to a game. I guess he was there for the next one, but he
Can you imagine if someone did that now?
What was that?
Imagine if someone did that now in the middle of the season, just takes a vacation and parties, goes to Vegas.
Imagine one of the top players on your team at the time, too.
Yeah, in the middle of a championship run.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I mean, if he really wanted to go on vacation, I think he could have had the money and the resources to, go to a beach for a week or however long. Yeah. He just goes to Vegas and parties. And it was – I think it's sort of a turning point in the 1998 season for the team, believe it or not, just that Jordan has trust in him to do that. And when he comes back, it's all business because and it's really Jordan respecting his teammates too. Obviously, Jordan's not that kind of guy. He has his afflictions too with gambling, which you see a little towards the end of episode 4. But he let Dennis Rodman do his thing for at least most of what we're seeing.
Yeah, going off what you're saying. Go ahead, Zach.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say I thought that clip when Jordan like had to wake him up in the hotel room or whatever his room and he walked into the practice in pajamas. Definitely hung over it. That was so funny.
Yeah, but JV, going off what you said, you said it was all business as soon as they came back, and that was one of my favorite stories of these 2 episodes is the story of the Indian Mile. Jordan was talking about having Judd and Steve Kerr, they're running, they're slowing down, and they had to catch up to Rodman, who was 4 laps ahead of them, and I thought that was funny. And another thing with Rodman that made me laugh was when he was in the weight room, and he's like, yeah, they think this is Gatorade, but really I'm drinking kamikaze right now.
Yeah.
I was like, for somebody to be drinking kamikaze in your weight room and acting like it's Gatorade, I found that hilarious.
No, yeah, Rodman's work ethic definitely, maybe not to Michael Jordan's level, but when he was locked in, he was locked in. It was funny, Tom, because right when Judd came on the screen, I was just like, Judd! I was just like, yeah!
I think I reacted the same way. I was like, Judd!
Like, good. They should give him a background thing. He should get his own episode like Rodman, man. Judd's awesome. But then the documentary and episode 3 goes into one of the best rivalries in basketball, especially in that 2-year period, the Chicago Bulls and the Detroit Pistons, the bad boy Pistons versus Scottie and Michael, and obviously Rodman on the Detroit Pistons. And for the 2 first finals, they would play 3 finals, NBA finals, or Eastern Conference finals, and then go on to the NBA finals. The Pistons implemented the Jordan rules and really tested Michael physically and emotionally, and it snapped for Jordan where he had to gain more muscle and really, again, a turning point in his career.
Actually, that Detroit Pistons team is one of my favorite teams of all time in the NBA. You know, they have one of the best 30 for 30s I've ever watched. And watching more of this documentary and learning what Jordan did, not only for himself, but for his team in that situation, he figured that he had to get better after he was getting abused, and he wanted to be able to take contact. But it wasn't only him. He wanted to help his entire team take that contact, so he brought his entire team to the weight room right after. And, you know, he said Scottie needed that one person to lift him up, and as long as I was by Scottie's side, he was there. And same with Horace, and I thought that was amazing. You know, that Jordan sort of took that leadership role to not only build himself and build up his weight, but to build up every player on their team to take on the Detroit Pistons.
Yeah, also I thought that it was interesting, like, so the Pistons had beat them twice and won the finals twice. If they won one more and got a 3rd championship, like 3 is like a big deal, and maybe we would be thinking about them differently if they had won 3. I mean, they're still like appreciated, maybe underappreciated by people now, but if they had got a 3rd, that would be something.
Well, and I think, Tyler, you hit it right up. Tom, you can get it in there.
Regardless of like how dirty that team was phenomenal. Just about every player on that team is known, you know, whether they're an all-star, a Hall of Famer, maybe in the Hall of Fame eventually. That team was amazing. Joe Dumars, John Sally, Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, and Dennis Rodman. That team was just amazing. And besides the point of them playing dirty, which made it 10 times harder to beat them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you both bring up great points, to Tyler especially so, where maybe they're underappreciated because sort of in my mind of how the basketball torch was passed was it was Larry, then it was Magic because he beat him, and then it was Jordan, which we obviously saw in the 1991 finals in episode 4 of The Last Dance. But there's a time period where the Pistons were dominant for 2 straight years, and maybe it's because it was more, I guess, of a group effort, or Isaiah Thomas wasn't the caliber of those guys, but they dominated. And I think I agree with Tyler in a bit where they're overshadowed just a bit, but they are a great team. And to your point, Tom, they should be, I think, more respected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if they had that player that was like, you know, that stands out, like a Jordan or whoever, maybe they'd be thought of differently. But it was more of like a group thing. Like, obviously they had great players, Isaiah, Laimbeer, and Rodman, but they didn't have like that one like ultra superstar that championship teams usually have.
And I think that was the difference between that team and every other team in the league, because if you look at back, you know, the Bulls were Jordan, Scottie, the Celtics were McHale, Parrish, and Bird. You look at the Lakers, it was James Worthy, even Kareem at one point, and Magic Johnson. You look at that team, and there was just 6 players that, you know, came together and helped them end up winning 2 finals back to back. And I think that was the one difference that they had was it was more than just those 2 or 3 players. It was an entire team. And again, the talent and how physical and dirty they played added up and, you know, worked on their side.
Definitely. As we shift to episode 4 away from Rodman, episode 4 really I thought was maybe the Phil Jackson episode. They didn't touch on his backstory as much as they did the 3 players, but definitely touched on it. Phil Jackson, bit of a wacky dude, you know. They called him a hippie in the documentary, definitely dressed in a unique way. And there was a mentioning of him taking acid, which, you know, that maybe explains some of the decisions he made with the Knicks. Just kidding. But
seemed like it.
Yeah, he's definitely an interesting character, and it was interesting to see the relationship between Dennis Rodman and him because you think he would want a straight-laced guy like Michael Jordan and someone who wanted to win like Scottie Pippen. But he really took, maybe not under his wing, but he appreciated Dennis Rodman and knew to keep his distance. Not because the two were so similar, but there were some similarities between them as players in terms of style and in terms of just how they acted off the court.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. I did not know that Phil was that big of a hustle player. You know, they showed a couple of the clips. Obviously, it was a little harder to see. They were older clips. But Phil was actually a lot better than I thought he was playing. And how him and Rodman connected off the court, I thought was actually really like interesting and unique because you don't see many friendships or relationships start in that kind of way. And it was sort of funny. My brother said that you could thank Phil Jackson for Dennis Rodman being close to North Korea now because of the way that him and Rodman connected. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, I took away from it is that Phil was just great at like handling the personalities. Like it's really hard on a team with Jordan. We saw Pippen how he was, and then obviously Rodman is super tough to like deal with, and to be able to win the championship with that team showed how like great he was at bringing people together, which is it made me think of his time with the Knicks as an executive and how he didn't do that at all.
Yeah.
I think that one thing that really molded him that was coaching outside the U.S. for a while. The stories they had, the fact that they would cut up a chicken and pour the blood on the opposing team's bench. Like, I think, you know, coaching somewhere in that kind of area is really going to mold you as a coach. And for him to go from that straight to, I believe it was the G League at the time, I'm assuming, and then straight to the NBA.
Yeah.
Yep, no, and definitely a unique path for him. He didn't just start out getting a Knicks assistant job, you know, even though he played there. He, I guess, took the hard route in terms of getting coaching credibility. And you mentioned it, Tom, Puerto Rico, not your average run-of-the-mill basketball towns, really. It was I forget the town's names, but definitely a North Carolina Duke rivalry in terms of what he was in. I don't remember Blood ever being in North Carolina Duke. That was definitely
the mayor shot the ref in the leg.
Oh my!
Yeah, what a story, right?
And it's like, oh, he didn't go to jail; he just couldn't go to home games.
Yeah, away games is
Charles Oakley being tossed out of the Garden because he started an uproar. This guy shoots someone, and they're just like, oh yeah, the same penalty, and that was great. You also, with Phil Jackson's background, you understand where the triangle offense comes from. So, yay, Tex Winter invented the triangle, took the Knicks back 5 years. Okay, sorry, we're going into the Knicks again. But Tex Winter was the inventor of the triangle offense, and I'm not that much of a basketball strategist in terms of, you know, how specifically it worked. I knew it was players formating a triangle, but they, at least for 2 minutes in the documentary, really showed the plethora of options that the triangle offense uses. And it was unique, and it was also really unique to see Michael take a step back. He still got his points and was still most of the time the leading scorer for the Chicago Bulls, but he realized if he wants to win a championship, he needs to not take a step back, but know that he can't shoot every possession.
Yeah, the one thing I found interesting actually was through a triangle, I forget which playoff series it was, but they were saying, look at Paxson, he's wide open, look at Paxson. And he finally started getting Paxson the ball, and Paxson was knocking down jumpers. But another thing I found interesting with the triangle is how Jordan hated it right away. He said, I don't want Bill Cartwright taking a shot with 5 seconds left on the clock. And I thought that was interesting. But again, if I was a coach, I wouldn't want Bill Cartwright taking a shot over Michael Jordan either, especially a turnaround fadeaway over somebody, you know?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting too. Jordan said he didn't like Phil Jackson when he first started off. He didn't like the triangle. You know, it was hard for him to like accept that role or buy into the game plan or whatever. And there was a funny quote he said, like, I guess Phil told him there's no I in team, but he said there is an I in win.
Yeah, and that was the relationship early on with those two. And I knew that Doug Collins coached the Bulls, but I thought that maybe over time he wasn't liked by Michael Jordan. Well, they went to an Eastern Conference final. He was liked. It was just, upper management wanting to implement the triangle offense and Reinsdorf and Krause, and obviously Tex Winter, who was a veteran on the Chicago coaching staff, that thrusted Doug Collins out. And it was sort of a situation, if I bring this to baseball for a second, but where Buck Showalter, didn't really, I wouldn't say get along with the front office, but it wasn't the best relationship. And even though he had success with the Yankees, he was brought in for Joe Torre, and Torre gets all the credit for the championships. and Showalter doesn't. And I'm not saying Doug Collins deserves a ring or anything, but he coached the Bulls the best of his abilities in those times without, Rodman and everything else. But they wanted to go in a different direction with Phil Jackson and the triangle offense.
And that's one thing with the coaching situation is obviously you could see a connection between Doug Collins and Jordan. It was amazing. But I think if you do keep Doug Collins in that situation and you never take Phil Jackson as your coach, he will not be able to control to control Dennis Rodman the way that Phil Jackson did. And that's one thing I found interesting about the two coaches is right away, Jordan didn't like Phil Jackson and Rodman connected with him. And I sort of felt that way with Jordan right away. He connected with Doug Collins. And I found that really interesting, to put yourself in Jordan's shoes for a second to get rid of a coach that you've had for the last 3 years who you created such a bond with and you're happy with him as your coach, to get a coach who you don't like the way he runs his offense, and for him to connect with the wackiest player on the team right away and not with you, it's sort of a little wake-up call as overall like a lead player on the team.
Yeah, I think sometimes even if the team's good and you just don't have the right coach, it might not work. Like I thought of the Cavs when they had LeBron and they had David Blatt, and they were fine. They were a great team, but he just wasn't the right guy for them, so they fired him and got Tyronn Lue and ended up winning the championship, winning the finals. I think sometimes it's just
the finals.
Yeah, sometimes, but that's sometimes it's just about the person. Like it might not, even if you're a great team, it just sometimes you just need a different coach. It's not the exact same, but similar.
And talking about shakeup, you see the documentary shows that in, I believe it was, Game 7 of the 1990 NBA Finals, or Eastern Conference Finals, I should say, between the Pistons and the Bulls, Scottie Pippen has a migraine, and I think Jordan's attitude towards it still today was, hey, there's nothing I could do about it. Maybe not as compassionate as you think someone would be, but then a year later in the NBA Finals, Scottie Pippen steps up and locks down Magic Johnson en route to what was a 5-game series win. And, we talked obviously about the addition of Rodman and the addition of Phil Jackson, who coached that finals team, and obviously Jordan. But Scottie was a huge component of that 1991 final. And just the difference a year makes. In 1990, he's not ready to go when the spotlight's on him. And then in 91, he takes the Lakers' best player and makes him near a non-factor.
I think watching and bringing up what I said before, how Jordan had everybody in the weight room together, I think that had a huge impact on Scottie, is when Jordan said he needed that one person to stand next to him and say, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. And for him to go on and say that Scottie is the first ever person to take Magic full court the entire game, And I think that in that generation of basketball, it was a little different. It was a lot of teams with more than one player on the team to guard. And, Jordan was obviously one of the best defenders at the guard position. And at that time, he needed Scottie with him, because if one of them's not guarding Magic, then the other one has to guard James Worthy, and then you have to guard Michael Thompson. And that Lakers team was stacked. But for Scottie to step up that big, and I think that Jordan, putting him in the weight room with the entire team and staying there as his captain, I guess you could say, and saying, listen, you're here. We're here together. You're not by yourself. I think that really let Scottie do what he did and lock on Magic.
Yeah, I thought what that showed me is just how good the Bulls team was defensively. I guess it was in episode 3, David Aldridge said he thought Dennis Rodman was the best on-ball defender he's ever seen. So they had Dennis Rodman on that team, Scottie Pippen, who locks up Magic in the finals, and Michael Jordan, who is, a defensive player of the year, best guard defender in the league. So that's what I thought when I watched that finals against the Lakers. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and one of the quotes was, I think, from B.J. Armstrong, said Scottie Pippen was unshakable in that series. As the documentary wraps up, it goes to on the plane in the 1998 season, and Jordan won some money betting the Denver Broncos, which is Tyler's favorite NFL team, as they defeated the Green Bay Packers. And then, just a funny little story with I forget the forward's name, but who was talking.
I think it was Scott Burrell, maybe.
Yes, and telling some secrets that maybe Burrell didn't want to the camera. That was a funny moment. But towards the end of the documentary, one thing stood out. We talked on it before we started recording here, and that was when Jordan said he was not a guy who won scoring titles, but he was a guy who won NBA championships, or something to the words of that. And that's where really I think in my head the flame started to ignite where, hey, that's exactly what people said about LeBron James before he won his first championship. And Tom, you talked about it again before we started recording, that comparison between LeBron and Michael Jordan. And I think a quote like that really, sets fire to it and taking away, because early in his career, Jordan, maybe not because of his individual talent alone, but the team around him couldn't get the NBA championship. And he had to prove to people and to himself that he could do it. When he finally did, it was, like the monkey off of his back.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, obviously we're going to go into the Jordan LeBron comparison as we always do.
Yes.
I think that's one thing is that, for me at least, watching this documentary and realizing that, Jordan didn't just work on himself in the weight room the one year that he knew that he couldn't win if he didn't learn how to take hits, but he brought his entire team with him. He didn't leave his city to go to a different team and play with other players. He stayed on the Bulls. He brought his entire team in the weight room. Yeah, their team was very good. The team was, awesome. I mean, you have Paxson, Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc, Judd, who are all shooters off the bench, and then a good big man and Big Ben. You have Bill Cartwright. And, it's not a terrible team. And I think that the difference is the teams that he had to play to get up to that finals first is, they're phenomenal teams. To take on that Pistons team in, 3 years in a row, and now you have to learn how to deal with how they're going to play, because they are a great defensive team, they're a great offensive team, and on top of that, they're going to basically beat the shit out of you, And I think that proves the type of player that Michael Jordan was. That he wasn't just, oh, I'm going to win scoring titles, but I'm going to go and I'm going to beat this team now. And I'm not even going to do it by myself. I'm going to bring my entire team in the weight room. We're going to work out until we're able to beat this team together. I don't think he was too selfish of a player. I think that he built up that Bulls organization, by himself, roster-wise at least. And I guess getting Rodman isn't on him. That's on the staff and the GM. But to build Scottie Pippen as a player, to build Horace Grant as a player, to have B.J. Armstrong and Luke Longley in the gym with you working out, it proves how he is as a leader.
Yeah, I think like for people like us who weren't around for Jordan's career, you see like the 6 championships, 6-0, and you think that, or you might think he just, dominated, coasted through his whole career, but you don't realize how long the journey was, how many losses there were before he even got that first championship. And the documentary definitely highlighted that well.
And that's the fun of this documentary in terms of making those comparisons to early LeBron, early Jordan, because, as you mentioned, Tom, it might have been difference in how they managed their teams and their rosters, but it was that work ethic to win, and it was an uphill climb. It wasn't just getting into the league and dominating right away. So I thought that was interesting and one of the takeaways I had. Now we'll wrap it up. We did this last week, your best moment and your worst moment, or, good or bad, however we phrased it last week, that you took away from this documentary. Or your good guy or bad guy, I think was the exact phrasing. But something that just we were like shaking your head about, and something that you were, loving about the documentary.
So you go first.
All right. I think my Rodman was definitely like one of my favorite moments, but I think it was when the Bulls were on the plane after. I think it was after they beat the Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals, and they showed them celebrating on the plane and all that, drinking champagne, and Jerry Krause was dancing.
Yeah,
I thought that was hilarious. And then bad moment, I guess this was kind of funny also, but MJ ratting out Scott Burrell and that part. Yeah. Even though it was funny, it was kind of like a bad moment.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with my best moment of the documentary in these last 2 episodes is definitely seeing my boy Judd.
Yeah.
Judd is my favorite player to ever play with on 2K, and I did not think he was going to be there. So just to see him, I got insanely happy. I literally screamed. I was like, "Oh, it's my boy Judd!" Yeah, I was so happy to see him. The worst moment, I think obviously from the Bad Boys 30 for 30 is the Pistons walking off the court. Not showing respect to the Bulls after they took 2 long years to even get there to beat them. And Jordan said, I shook their hands. I congratulated them. I wish them luck after both times they beat us. and for us to sweep them and them to sort of say, like, screw you guys, and just walk off the court in front of their faces to go to their locker room, I think that was the worst moment in the series.
Yeah, and Tom, I'll piggyback right off because that was my bad guy too. Isaiah Thomas in this whole thing, I think, still defending it. You guys know me. I'm a big proponent of sportsmanship and just having respect for, your opponent. And I understand that Isaiah maybe felt that the Celtics that he and the bad boy Pistons overtook didn't show them respect, but Jordan did and the Chicago Bulls did when you beat them in consecutive finals. And I'm not saying, you have to give hugs and do a jersey swap like the athletes do today, which is just ridiculous, but a shake of the hand, a slap on the back, a high, whatever, just something that, hey, good job, and congrats, and I'm going to take a shower, something along those lines. And that's why I think Isaiah Thomas is an interesting guy and just a bad dude in terms of just how he was portrayed here. And Jordan, they showed the producers behind the documentary showed him the clip, and Jordan was like, yeah, okay, you show me what you want, but nothing's going to change my opinion that Isaiah Thomas not a great dude. My favorite moment, and they only touched on it for like 30 seconds. Rodman dates Madonna, and then he starts posing nude for magazine covers everywhere, and with the basketball
on.
obviously on top.
Changed him.
So Madonna just brought out this character in Dennis Rodman. He deserves some credit, man. That was just overshadowed. I really thought we were going to get Michael Wilbon talking about the importance of Madonna to Dennis Rodman's career. I didn't get any of it, and I'm a little disappointed. But Madonna was my good guy from episode 3 and 4. Good on her. And, I just – that was a part that just made me laugh. I couldn't believe it. Anything else you guys want to add?
Yeah, actually, one more scene with Rodman that made me laugh is because you brought up jersey swapping. I totally forgot about this. Is players give away their shoes and they give away their towels and undershirts, and there's one clip where Rodman just gives away his jersey, gives away his undershirt, and just walks to the locker room with nothing on, just his pants and his shoes. And I thought that was hysterical because you don't see players just taking their jersey off and walking shirtless to the locker room. Maybe they'll keep their undershirt on, whatever. But I think Rodman was one of the first players to just take his shirt off and walk straight to the locker room and no care in the world.
Yeah, they're not I don't know if maybe this was like the drugs and alcohol or whatever, but I noticed they showed Rodman an interview right before he was drafted, or maybe his rookie year. He seemed like a completely different person compared to how he was with the Bulls and now in the interviews.
Yeah, I think even him getting interviewed though, they asked him, they said, "Were you this bad guy in the court, in college?" And he said, "No, the Detroit Pistons did that to me." I think playing with players like Rick Mahorn and Bill Lambert, that's what's going to happen to you. They're gonna teach you how to be the worst person you could be.
Yeah, no, definitely.
He's totally different.
Yeah,
on and off the court.
Absolutely, that was definitely a highlight. Dennis Rodman, and they promoted it during the NFL draft. At least Trey Wingo did. Of this will be the Dennis Rodman episode, and it definitely delivered. So that does it for us. Episode 3 and 4 recap. If you found this video, you're watching it after 5 and 6, come back to the same place, and you could watch us for Tyler Hartman and Tom Leuthner. I'm John Vicari. This was the Last Dance Podcast.